record on this. There we go. Well, just to repeat myself on what I just said, as I forgot to record at the very beginning of our get together today, is Shane, I really appreciate having your work in this gallery. It's an honor to us, and I'm really looking forward if you can tell us a little bit more about how this kind of started. Give us that little tidbits of what we can understand of how this spark actually lit in you, and a little bit more about what that 10 years has been all about a little bit.
Sure, of course.
Appreciate it.
I'd be honored. So in October 4th, 2012, I made my first wet plate. You have to understand that I never owned a camera. Can you all hear me? I never owned a camera before 2012. I never had a camera. I never had with interest in photography. My dad didn't own a camera. I was on Facebook, and this image scrolled by the screen. And for whatever reason, I always think back, if I had not been on Facebook at that nanosecond on that thread at that specific moment, this picture would have went by me, or I would have missed it by a second or two, and I never would have found this process. So I saw this image. There's something about the image, and I have it saved. It's just of a motorcycle and some fuzzy people behind it. And there's nothing there that would like grab you. It wasn't like the most beautiful photograph I'd ever seen in my life, is what I, romantically think about this, is that it was just it wasn't that well of a executed plate. But I asked the photographer, his name was Paul, and I said, Paul, what is that? And he said, well, it's a wet plate. And for whatever reason, I said, well, I would just love to do that. And Paul messaged me back. He says, well, are you a photographer, Shane? I said, no, I don't even own a camera. And he says, well, I've been a photographer for 25 years and I can't figure this out. There's no way a non-photographer ever teach himself wet plate. And I think that was in the documentary. And within 45 days of that conversation, I had made my first wet plate on October 4th, 2012. So, I never knew anyone would have any interest in what I was doing. I was just making these works for myself. I wasn't interested in sharing. I didn't think I could sell books. I didn't think I was going to do prints. It was just something that I was chasing, and I continued to chase and tried to improve at. Understand, when you don't have a mentor, you didn't go to some training, or, I had nobody here to show me how to make wet plating. I didn't even know I had never stepped foot in a darkroom before. So you can about imagine the daunting task it is to actually make a darkroom, your own darkroom, and never been in a darkroom before. But that's what I was up against. So, and I was just making work, and I started sharing, and people started getting interested. So what you guys see on the walls there are some prints that I had done in the Netherlands by Luc Breffeld, a master printer. And what's beautiful about these are carbon prints. So these prints, before I had met Luc, I had done many different renditions of my work. Like I scan my work to share it on social media, and then I do a print here with my little laser jet or whatever. I'd have other people do prints. Never before, until I saw Luc's work, did I find the most perfect representation of my work on paper. There's only, you guys are sitting there and you're amongst 20 of my prints that are framed. There's only one piece of my work that I truly feel that's with you right now, is the one on that wall there, the original silver on glass. So I have students come out from the universities. I have about 8 different classes. I have hundreds of students come to my studio every year, and I teach them and show them this process firsthand. And they'll see a print on the table or something and say, I just love that. And I love saying to them, well, that's not my work. And they look at me confused, like, what do you mean it's not my work? I said, well, my work is only black glass and silver. These are just copies of my work. So the photograph there, or the plate there behind you, I don't know if your members know this, but that image is made out of pure silver on glass. Are you guys familiar with the process at all?
Well, probably most of us aren't that familiar with it.
Okay, so that image there is made out of pure silver. And what's gorgeous about pure silver, people, is that silver does not degrade. So when the students come into my studio, I tell them, if I put a silver spoon here on the ground and I come back 500 years from now, what's on the ground? And their answer must be a silver spoon. And so, like all even these prints, these carbon prints, have no chance whatsoever to last as long as that silver plate. So as of this conversation, I have original plates like the one you see there on the wall in 68 museums around the globe, including the Smithsonian, the Library of Congress, the world famous Native American Herd Museum, the Pitts Rivers Museum at the University of Oxford, The Royal Photographic Society, the oldest photographic society in the world, actually has 2 of my original plates. So I have 68 different archives that are curating this series. So the series is called Northern Plains Native Americans, a modern wet plate perspective. It's a 10-year process of photographing 1,000 Native Americans in this process I hold so dear. So I guess the next question would be, well, why did you decide with Native Americans? There was a wet plate artist here in Bismarck, North Dakota by the name of Orlando Scott Goff. I found out about him that he was making wet plates in my same hometown. I was born and raised in Bismarck. So I was very excited to hear about this gentleman that came. It was the 1870s and 1880s. He was here in my town. I know the building that he was in. It's the Block House. It's on Main Street. I drove by this building all the way through my childhood. I never had any idea that the man who took a photograph of Sitting Bull, not only a photograph of Sitting Bull, the first ever photograph of Sitting Bull, was from my hometown of Bismarck, North Dakota.
Wow.
So I did this deep dive into Orlando Scott Goff. I hired I commissioned a document, a peer-reviewed document. He's a forgotten historical character. There's nothing formally about him anywhere. And over a 2-year period, Lou Hoffermill, the historian that used to work at the State Historical Society, put together a 16-page, the most intense, comprehensive, as much information as we could find. He actually found his grave and took a photograph of his grave for me. And we found this information and it was peer reviewed. And if you go on to Google and type in Orlando Scott Goff, the first link will be from the North Dakota State Historical Society. They dedicated their entire journal to it when I published it, and you can read all about him. So in the process of finding about Orlando Scott Goff, and then I found out that, well, Sitting Bull was here, for God's sakes. I mean, the first ever photograph of Sitting Bull. And just to explain that story a little bit, Goff knew that Sitting Bull was coming into Bismarck. It was 1882. And he didn't know how to get Sitting Bull in, so he promised Sitting Bull $50 in US dollars at the time. And you can, $50 is about $2,000 equivalent of today's money, which was a lot of money, you can about imagine, to Sitting Bull at the time. So Sitting Bull got paid $50. He sat down in the chair. It was a 50-second exposure. So Sitting Bull had to sit completely still. And I can explain that to you as well. These are long exposures. I experienced 10-second, that exposure on the wall there, all the exposures that you guys see on the wall, those are 10-second exposures. Your iPhone will take a photograph in 1/60th of a second. Those are 10 seconds. So it's 600 times longer to make a wet plate than it is with a modern day camera. So Sitting Bull would have had head brace connected to the back of his head, holding him still. Are you guys familiar with the photograph that I'm talking about? Let me show you. Let me show you. I have it on the wall.
Yeah.
I don't mean to get away from the camera.
That's okay.
But this is the photograph
Wow.
of Sitting Bull taken in Bismarck, North Dakota.
And that's
August 1st, 1881.
an obvious reproduction.
Oh, reproduction. Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And
Goff's studio burnt down twice. So we have no original negatives of Goff's. They were all lost.
and so where was the original on that one?
Well, the original plate would have been, in his studio, obvious, I would think. But the, prints and stuff, he sold them, and they made their way out into the wild.
How did they make prints in those days? I wonder. From
They made albumin prints, carbon prints. They made
but from a plate.
dikes,
They couldn't scan the plate.
No, so I'm making what you see on the wall behind you is a black glass ambrotype, which is called a positive.
Okay.
And I would have made, if I was a photographer, why I love that plate behind you is there's only one in the world.
Yes.
And it can never be duplicated ever. I can never duplicate the collection of molecules of silver on that plate. But what I can do is I can lay it on a scanner and I can make these beautiful prints for you. But again, they are not the original works. They didn't have scanners, obviously. So what we would do as wet plate artists, because I want to sell my prints, right? Like I just had Sitting Bull sit for me. I want to sell you a print for $1. I want to sell the gentleman behind you for $1. I want to sell, and then when I sell all the prints I have on hand, I want to be able to go back and get more. So what I would have done, and what Goff did do, his 50-second exposure was on clear glass.
Oh, okay.
With clear glass, I can show you. I'm sorry, I got all these things here all throughout but on clear glass, you see this here?
Yeah.
Light can go through it. I would put my emulsion on a piece of paper. I would lay this down in the sun, and the negative would, just like a normal negative would work.
Oh,
And then they
okay.
could make as many of these, many prints as they wanted. But the original glass plates were lost by Goff
Gotcha.
in these fires. So that's the difference between what I do. I make positives. I love the fact that I'm making one-off things. All the prints on the walls, those are just essentially just prints. They're not the original works. And there's just a difference between the two, but it makes it very easy for exhibitions. It's tougher for people to be able to acquire it. My original glass plates have sold for as much as $3,000 a piece. So,
Now, Shane, I got to ask you then another slightly not technical question, but a process question. Obviously, then in this last 10 years, you've learned a lot about the process in particular, and you've kind of perfected it, I imagine, starting from scratch, like you explained, the first day testing it out to now. And you've got a beautiful studio and a beautiful darkroom all there for you to use.
right.
You have that ability to make these plates that it seems like you've got your process really down, if you ask me.
Well, there was a big jump from when I first started. I took that first photograph. So I learned about Orlando Scott Goff. I learned about Sitting Bull. And then guess what I found? I saw a Smithsonian Institute article about Ernie Lapointe. And who is Ernie Lapointe? Ernie Lapointe is the great grandson of Sitting Bull. So
Right.
I found his phone number, and I think maybe you guys watched the documentary.
Yeah.
I got a hold of him, and he came in, and he was plate number 1 for the series.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, so I made 135 years later, after Orlando Scott Goff, I made I made Eternal Field. One moment.
Yeah. Yeah. This guy, huh?
So 135 years later, after Orlando Scott Goff made the first ever photograph of Sitting Bull in Bismarck, North Dakota, in the historic wet plate process, I made Eternal Field with Ernie Lapointe, the great grandson.
Yeah, and that was such a great story in the film, just fantastic. And to hear his words about the experience himself, to kind of sit in his great grandfather, yeah, or
Yeah,
great,
his great grandfather in the same city.
Have the same experience, that was just amazing.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where my next questions are going, actually, are away from the process and technical side of this whole thing, but back to the series itself and the importance of it, and how it's nice how you just explained how that kind of the seed was first planted. It's right there in your town. And now you're photographing Native American ancestors from around the world, I imagine, and that opportunity, the experience for you, the experience for each one of them individually to do what Sitting Bull's great grandson just did, and to connect with their ancestors in that way through photography and through wet plate. It's just amazing. So why don't you expound on your experience with the Native Americans a little bit? That'd be great.
Yeah, so I just started with that photograph of Ernie Lapointe, and then Dakota Goodhouse. He's a professor and a Native American historian at the United Tribes Technical College. He was plate number 2. And by the time then someone said to me, well, why don't you just do a series? The Historical Society came to me. So what's really significant about that wet plate of Ernie Lapointe, okay, is that of these 100,000, I have over 1,000 plates at different museums. That was the first ever plate to get into a museum. So the State Historical Society recognized the historical significance of my wet plate of the great grandson of Sitting Bull. It kicked down the door at the State Historical Society. I tell this story where, I can take any one of my plates on any given day, and I can donate them to the State Historical Society, and they take them without any question. So I was starting, and I'll do 10 plates. But how am I going to find 8 more Native Americans? That seems impossible. I started sharing on Facebook, and then people started contacting me. Then my series was going to be 50 plates. I was thinking, I'm going to really, we're going to do 50 plates. And then I got to 50, and I'm like, dang, we should do 100 plates. And then I did 100 plates. And when I got 101 plates in, I said, screw this. I knew what I was telling myself. I'm going 15 to 20 years into the future. I'm going to try to take 1,000 plates. Wow. And that's how I found myself on this. But it wasn't too the subsequent, the next big thing that happened for my career as a wet plate artist is, so the State Historical Society was starting to collect these plates, But then Evander Holyfield, some of you older gentlemen in the room, 4-time heavyweight champion of the world. I can see Evander Holyfield to some of these college students, if you guys want to believe it or not, and they don't know who I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
But everyone, my dad was a boxer, a Golden Glove boxer, and you know, anyone who of my age or older knows who Evander Holyfield, the 4-time heavyweight champion of the world, is. So he entered my studio and I had him for an hour, and I made a plate called The Real Deal. And what happened is the Smithsonian Institute was deciding, up to that point, the Historical Society of North Dakota had to approve every plate that came into my studio. They had to say, okay, what do you want to donate? We have to review it as a team once a month or whatever, and then we'll let you know if we'll accept it. Well, Evander Holyfield walks in my studio. I get that plate of him, and the Smithsonian calls and says, we would just love to take that into our archive. So I donated that plate to the state archive. The Smithsonian sent out a climate control van all the way to North Dakota to pick up my plate of Evander Holyfield. They valued it at $25,000. So that was on a Friday. The State Historical Society heard about, the North Dakota State Historical Society heard about this acquisition by the Smithsonian. And on Monday, I got a call from the director of the State Historical Society of North Dakota. And she said, Mr. Balkowitsch, by the way, we will accept any plate that you're willing to give us here from here on out. So that's how I've got nearly 900 plates of the State Historical Society of North Dakota. And then it opened up the door for my creative work. I could have pictures of my family, you know, the butcher, the banker, family, friends, people, you know, significant. I'm trying to encapsulate the times here. Like back in the Victorian era, the photographers often took a picture of the blacksmith and took a picture of the butcher and took a picture of the businessman and took a picture of the banker. I'm trying to do the same thing here. And I hope my work, and as of last Friday, just to let you guys know, I've been doing this nearly 11 years. I've made 4,703 plates. It's taken me 11 years to make 4,703.
Well, that's
still a lot.
That's a whole lot, though.
Well, yeah, but you
can.
can. But you go get married this weekend and hire a digital photographer, and he will take that in an afternoon.
I know.
Am I right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah. So every plate is labeled. That's the other thing about this history. So every plate, if you turn over the back of my plate, I have the date, the plate number, the date of birth of the subject's name, if they have a tribe, you know, what tribe they're from, if they have a Native American name, and then it says by Shane Balkowitsch, Nostalgia Glass, Bismarck, North Dakota. I'm sitting talking to you from the first natural light wet plate studio built in the country in over 140 years. So you'd have to be a complete idiot to build a natural light photography studio in 2020. Well, 2017 is when I built this.
But you know, you might not be the only idiot out there.
Well, from the ground up, there's a lot of people that have their own studios, obviously, and there's a lot of people that have recommissioned old photographic studio, but understand this was built bespoke to me. I had to figure out, so the process, to get a little technical again for you, Michael, the process uses UV light. Okay, I need the UV light. I need the sun from the light. So I was in my warehouse. Evander Holyfield came into my warehouse. I had no windows and I had all these bulbs on him, and he must have thought I was crazy. I mean, this man was in the ESPN photography studio, right? And he's in my little corner warehouse. And my work really took that next level when I started. I took my mom outside one day and took her wet plate out in the natural light. Yeah. And I said, oh, I'm missing something. And what I was missing was this process wants the natural light. It doesn't want to use these bulbs. It wants the full spectrum of light. And you can see the tonality of that original plate and the beauty of it. That far exceeds anything that I could have done with bulbs. So at that point, I decided I'm going to build a natural light studio. Yeah. But you can't use just regular windows. So there's 3,500 pounds of glass above my head here. Okay, it's about 16. The windows is about 16 feet across, 12 feet tall, and then there's a skylight about the same size coming in here. If I would have put modern day windows into the studio, it took me 6 months to figure this out. If I would have put modern day windows in the studio, they have UV protection. I might as well use bricks for my skylight. So what industry, why did it take me 6 months? The greenhouse. So I found out the greenhouse industry is where I needed to get my glass from. Yeah. So there's 3,500 pounds of greenhouse glass. All my paintings on the wall are fading, my carpet's fading, my couch is fading, everything's fading, but it doesn't matter about the couch. It doesn't matter about the carpet. What does it matter about? It matters about that object that's sitting behind you on that wall. Yeah.
Yeah. I have a good friend that's in the audience on Zoom, Jim Fitzgerald, who has that same experience doing carbon transfer prints, right?
Oh, hey, Jim.
Yeah. Jim, can you hear us?
Yeah, I was muted. That's
okay.
all.
I just wanted to make sure you could speak and could hear. Also,
No, I can relate to what Shane's doing.
the same type of experience, yeah, with the archivalness of your images and prints and everything. Anybody here have any questions for Shane? Anything?
I got one.
Sure.
I got
What
one.
you got, Jim?
Shane, are you diffusing the light coming through that
No.
daylight studio?
No, not at all.
Have you found
I learned early on, even with my bulbs, the bulbs, a lot of those, those umbrellas and stuff for bulbs, they have diffusers on the front to soften it.
Yeah.
And it just made my exposure times double. So
Oh, okay.
I'm Jim, I'm f 4.5 wide open on a Carl Zeiss Tessar lens. It's the only lenses that I use, wide open for 10 full seconds in order to get these exposures. So I've been told, and I'm not a digital photographer, I don't even own a digital camera other than my iPhone. I guess it's ISO, it's the negative ISO is the how slow this process is.
Yeah, who cares?
It's so slow, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, no, yeah. I don't diffuse it because my exposure times will just go through the roof, buddy.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Good question.
No, I shoot really slow film, and long exposures and all that are what I live for. So I can relate to you.
It's all about
when you're building the studio too.
Yeah, and explain to the group, and just to explain my theory on that, Jim, as well, is that I look at this as I'm taking 10-second movies. Okay, I'm taking still lifes that are 10-second movies. The subject's heart's going to be beating. I know that I'm an oncology nurse by trade. I know the heart's going to beat about 12 seconds, 15 seconds or so, depending on how excited they are. They're going to take a shallow breath. Maybe I coach them about blinking. I find out a point of reference where they're going to keep their eyes. And if they have to blink, there's no lazy blinks in this process. It's got to be a quick, non-lazy blink. And what's most beautiful about this, Jim, for me, is that I think that my sitter can have a thought, and that thought can be transferred. You don't, when you're taking a 1/60th, and I mean, that's really slow in regards to modern photography. I mean, there's much faster photography than that today. You could almost argue that no part of the subject's life is being captured in that 1/60th of a second. But when you take a 10-second exposure, it's a still life movie, and all of that life, the blood coursing through their vein, everything is captured in that image, and that's what I find really romantic and beautiful about this process.
Yeah, that's similar to how I feel when I like to do pinhole photography, and I
absolutely
I look at it like this is I'm taking a photograph of a period of time. It's like a whole different thing. It's similar,
and it becomes more significant. It just for me, I mean, just for me spiritually, it just becomes more significant. It's a bigger, when you sit in front of my camera someday, Mike, and I hope you do, it's just it's a more significant thing.
Well, now I got
having 10 seconds of having 10 seconds of Mike on the plate versus not. So and then the other thing is the subject's got to also perform. So it's not, I could do the most wonderful technical work, right, Jim, behind the camera and all the movements and get everything right and the pouring the plate and getting it all right. But if my subject doesn't dance with me, can't perform, if they move, I mean, you won't have the images that you guys see on display there. They wouldn't be there.
Well, that's another good subject right there is, and I'm looking straight up at this wall of 8 prints across from me. And I'm looking at the poses and the faces and everything. And I'm imagining it right now that that's an honest collaboration between the subject and you, the photographer. It was like I can see a 50-50 there. It certainly wasn't all you, right?
Not all me, not even close. And I have to give Frederick Scott Archer, the man who invented this process, he's in there too, We can't leave him out. But he gets a percentage of that credit.
So I would say, besides your mastery of the process, your poses, your images are beautiful. Absolutely.
Can I talk about that just for a minute?
Sure.
It is a collaboration. And when these people come in, I've been very aware of, like, Edward Curtis was criticized by some critics because he'd take a photograph in the 1920s of a Native American in New Mexico. And then 3 months later, he'd take a photograph in Washington State of a Native American, and the same vest appeared on the Native American in Mexico, it appeared on the Native American in Washington. And he was criticized for this because people got this perception that he was dressing people up with his own costumes. None of my work, all 711 of them over the last decade, none of my work I've ever introduced any article of clothing or any prop into it. If they don't bring it, it doesn't come. Okay. So, and I've had Native Americans even confused about this. They'll come in and say, well, do you have something for me to wear? And the answer is, no, I don't have anything for you to wear.
Well, well, obviously, and that being the case, they certainly came prepared to show their most important, what would you call it?
The regalia. If for me and you, we would get in our tuxedo. If you were to be asked, do you want to have a formal portrait taken? You and I would get in a suit of some kind, right? I mean, this is their most formal dress, and they're trying to honor their ancestors before them. Calvin Grinnell, the Hidatsa leader, Hidatsa elder, I was about 6 years into this process, and Calvin called me on the phone and he said, I have your name, Shane. And I said, what do you mean, Calvin? He says, I have your name. And it didn't register. He says, I have your Native American name. He says, I want to call you Shadow Catcher. He says, can I come to your studio next Sunday? You have to cook proper food. We have to have exchanging of gifts. You have to have witnesses. And I'm going to have it was an hour-long ceremony giving me the name Miyishte Ekagoche, which means shadow catcher in Hidatsa. So at that moment, Mike, these did not become strangers that come in. Like, I have 4 people, strangers coming in. I'm booked out 7 months for my Friday sessions. There's 4 Native Americans coming in this Friday. I've had Native Americans come as far as from Florida to my studio, drive in from Florida. They don't come in as strangers anymore. They come in, and if they know who I am and they know my Hidatsa name, they come in and call me their brother, and they throw their arms around me. And at that point, it just took this entire, I'm getting goosebumps telling you, it just took this entire series to a totally different level, because now I'm taking photographs of my brothers and sisters.
Absolutely. Well, I was just going to say the cumulative experience of the last 10 years of meeting and going through that experience with, you now have over 500 Native American subjects, right? 711. Okay. So
I know exactly, Mike.
Yeah. So, I mean, each and every one, I mean, the amount of experience you had with each and every one of those individuals or parties is remarkable. So I totally understand what you're saying. And to give you a little idea, I mean, I'm starting to think, I don't know if I told you this, and most of my friends know, but I spent 20 years of my life in Hawaii, and I'm very connected with the Hawaiian culture, which I also
indigenous as well.
And obviously, as an individual, that's probably why I was attracted to your work too, because in relation to my friends that are Native Hawaiians, and I've explained to you, I have some important Native American friends here in Clatsop County, but my relation to that culture is probably what drew me to your work in basically honoring this culture.
It's
right?
the same work, Mike.
Yeah.
You and I did the same work. We're doing the same work. Okay. Doesn't matter if I go down to Mexico, there's indigenous people there. If I go to Brazil, if I go over to, I can go to Africa. It's the same work. It's just, it's trying to pay homage and respect a people that came before us.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know what to add. Your process is remarkable. Your experience is remarkable. Your plates are remarkable. Every relation I've had with you since we've got to know each other has been remarkable. If you ask me, I think you're a fantastic individual, Shane.
Oh, thanks.
I now, after this get together, I now have it on my list as I'm going to get to Bismarck and visit Shane Balkowitsch and have a photo taken.
You should take me up on that offer. I would enjoy
Absolutely.
it. What most photographers do, they come in on a Thursday. You'll arrive on a Thursday night. I'll pick you up at the airport. We're gonna go out for dinner.
I'm driving.
Friday. Oh, okay. Friday we'll have. I'm scheduled out, so I'll have sitters in here. We'll work all day Friday, and then Saturday it'll be me and your time in the studio by ourselves, and I'll take your portrait and answer any questions that you want. And then so that's that. I've had so many photographers come in to my studio. I never. I can remember the first photographer ever walking into my studio. You got to understand, I did this for 5 years without even calling myself a photographer, Mike. And I didn't call myself a photographer, not because I thought I was better than photographers. I didn't want to insult photographers. I didn't know shit about anything. I mean, I didn't know an aperture from an f-stop to an exposure time to development time. I didn't know what kind of red lights I needed for a darkroom. I knew nothing. So I just didn't want to. And I can remember how nervous I was the first day. His name was Michael Lalonde. He walked into my studio, and here I actually was face to face. I'd been making plates for a couple, 2-3 years. And here a real photographer came into my studio. I remember just being blown away.
Yeah. Oh, shoot, I lost my train of thought. I was just thinking of something.
I like that he says real photographer.
Yeah. Well, it's all right. Oh, I know what I was going to say is that I've also come to realize, probably most certainly, if you're going to have a photo taken of yourself by Shane Balkowitsch, it's going to be in Bismarck. Meaning you're not going to, when you visit me here, you're probably not going to be photographing me here because your work is done in your studio, and I can see that.
Yeah. And well, have you ever seen, I got a picture of all the equipment that I need to take a portrait. You know, I was called, and Greta Thunberg, you guys saw in the documentary, right? That Greta Thunberg, I mean, the back of my Hummer is packed with gear. I mean, it takes me days to prepare. People just think, you know, that these processes, oh, just grab your camera and throw it over your shoulder and, you know, set it on a tripod. So, I mean, I have to have a portable darkroom with me, to pull this off. So it's not something that travels, and I can only do my best work here. So all my serious work is done in the studio. And I built the studio because I wanted it to be like the epicenter of creativity in North Dakota. I've opened my door up to my studio to any photographer, any painter, any podcaster, any musician. I've got keys out in the public where if I'm not in here, just use the key, open up the front door. There's one rule: leave it as you found it. And so I'm trying to get as many of these young photographers and other stuff, trying to this facility that I built here is way too good not to share. It's way too good not to share. So I don't charge anything, and I just let people come in, whoever wants. If you need a creative space with natural light, if you're a painter and you have a muse and you want to do a painting, you can use my studio. So it's always been my philosophy.
Well, I'm sure that's very valuable, especially North Dakota, pretty remote, and there's not a lot of opportunity for something like that. So that's really nice. Really nice.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah.
I'm very fortunate to be able to do this kind of stuff.
Yeah. I don't want to really stop talking. I could talk all night with you, Shane.
Anyone else have any questions?
Come on, guys.
Could you walk us briefly through the process of preparing the plate?
Absolutely. So I make everything on black glass. So that piece there that's on black glass. So that, you know, it cost me last year. I shouldn't have done this, but I met with my accountant, and I knew my expenses for the business. I mean, for the studio, I keep them separate, and I knew how much money I took in. And we did a calculation, and each 8x10 black glass ambrotype cost me $144 last year to make. That piece of black glass on that wall there, that's that's $12 in just glass alone. But I mean, that's just my base starting point. It's $12. So I buy black glass. That's the same as you'd find in any church, black glass, stained glass. I buy it in 24 by 24 sheets. I start with that. I grab a glass cutter and a ruler, and I break these pieces in glass into these 8x10. I could have a company, cut them perfectly 8x10. I have no interest in that. Even if you take a real good closer look at that later tonight, you will see that that's not perfectly square, that 8x10 there. And I love that because it shows the hand of the artist that I cut these things down to myself. So I start with these 24 inches pieces of glass. I get 6 of those pieces of glass from that. And then you take what's called collodion. Are you familiar with it? It's the emulsion. So collodion was used in the medical application. So in the Victorian era, put yourself in the Civil War. You have to think about Abraham Lincoln time is when this was invented in 1851. So if we were in the war, Mike and you, me and you, Mike, and I was a doctor, and you fell off the horse and let's say cut your arm on a piece of barbed wire, I would have ether with me because I'm a doctor. And if I had to put you unconscious for whatever reason, or pull a tooth or amputate an arm, I would have ether with me. I'd put a rag over your face and you'd fall unconscious, and I'd do my surgery, and then you'd wake up some hours later. I would grab a bottle of ether. You fell off, you cut your arm, And then I have gun cotton. So I'd go to my gunsmith, you know, the wadding that they shove in the back of on those old powder guns, that's cellulose. So I take the cellulose from the gunsmith, I put it in the bottle of ether, I'd shake it around, I'd make collodion. I'd go up to Mike's arm, he just fell off, I'm the doctor. I go up, oh shit, you got a really bad cut here, Mike. Hold still. I take my bottle of collodion, I'd pour it into Mike's wound and I'd hold his wound shut and I'd seal his wound without any stitches. Now, I have actually cut my finger cutting that glass that I explained to you earlier in the studio really bad. And I've gone over to my bottle of collodion and poured it into my finger. It works really well, but it bitches like, I mean, it burns like a bitch. I mean, it is painful. So what Archer figured out in 1851, I'm sorry, I hope I'm not getting too long-winded. So Archer figured out, so we had collodion. Okay, Archer knew in 1851 about this glue that doctors were using to stitch people together, like hold wounds together. So he figured out there's an affinity between bromide salts and silver molecules. So he had to figure out, how am I going to get silver onto a plate and make a photosensitive plate out of this silver? And they had known for, you know, they've known for 7,500 years that silver was photosensitive. So he figured out, if I put bromide salts in the collodion, I have salted collodion. I pour that on the plate, the emulsion, and now the bromide in that, and then I pour it off, and I'm trying to get to your answer. So I pour the collodion on the plate. I have to cover the full plate. I have to pour it off. I let it set for a second, and then I immerse it in silver nitrate, 10%. Okay, at that point, guess what? The silver molecules in the silver jump out of the silver bath and are attracted to the molecules of bromide, and I make a photosensitive plate. I should explain to you guys is also, I explained the longevity of that plate that's on there, okay? I want you guys, after we talk, to go take a really good look at it. If you have a magnifying glass or something in the studio, grab it and let them take a look at it. My photographs, these are the most high resolution photographs man has ever created. I'm writing in molecules of silver. So you can take that plate off the wall, go to the Oregon, the biggest scientific place that you have in Oregon, ask for their most high-powered microscope. Wow. You can put that microscope on that plate that Mike's looking at right now, and you cannot get to the pixel or grain that makes up the image. How many molecules of silver at the tip of my finger does it take for you to see it with the human eye? Anyone have a guess?
No.
2 billion. That's with a B.
So it's super sharp.
2 billion. So you have to use an electron microscope. And I saw the research. There were some college students that did the research on this. They looked at daguerreotypes and wet plates with an electron microscope at 10,000 power. And you can actually, at that level, you can actually start seeing the clumping of silver that makes up my image. So that image on the wall is more than likely the most high resolution photograph any of you have ever seen in your life. You just did not know it. So we abandoned this process in 1885. Why? For something more convenient and cheaper.
Same thing that they did with carbon transfer.
Same thing. Okay, so the story and the history repeats itself. So I want to get back to this gentleman's question. So
how much silver nitrate do you use on a plate?
Well, it's 10% silver. So if I get a little bottle of silver, maybe about this big, about that round, is about $800. And you know, then you have to put it in the solution. So, you know, my silver baths, I've got about 8 of them in the other room. They're about $1,200 to $1,500 a silver bath, but I have rather large silver baths. So it's, you know, it's silver. It's made out of silver. So to get back to your question real quick, I'm going to finish this process up. So we poured the collodion on the plate. We immersed it in the silver nitrate. We made a photosensitive plate. I go back in after 3 minutes and I grab the plate out. I load it in my plate holder. Now I can't let any light to it. Obviously, you guys all know photography. I go to the camera. I do my exposure, my 10-second exposure. I close that. I bring it back in. I have to develop with the ferrous sulfate, copper sulfate developer. I watch the plate. It's come to life. It looks like a negative at that point. I do the rinse bath, which is the stop bath at that point. I get that developer off that plate. I have to stop that development or I overdevelop it. I lose my image. Then I go over and then I got the fixer. And I put the plate in the fixer. Over the next 3 to 5 minutes, the plate fixes. It could be turned from a negative into a positive. I think you guys saw that in the documentary. You'll see where it turns it from a negative into a positive. Then I have to rinse it for another half hour, and then it has to dry for about an hour. I'm still not done. So I've done all those processes. I have a dry plate in front of me. It's still not done. Why is it not done, Shane? because I have the image here. It's made out of pure silver. But what's the problem with that at that point? The problem is, remember the silver spoon analogy that I explained to you guys just about a half hour ago? You put it on the ground, you come back 500 years and it's a silver spoon on the ground. That's going to be the case, but one thing would have changed. It would have oxidized. It would have turned black. And we don't want to lose our images. So they figured out in the Victorian era, I lost your image there a little bit, Mike. They figured out in the they figured out in the Victorian era that if they pour shellac or varnish, like table shellac, something you would varnish a table with in the 1850s, you pour that over the molecules of silver, that blocks out all the oxygen. So then I have to scan the plate, and then I have to put the varnish over it. It has to dry, and then I have to label the plate, and then I'm good. But all those steps have to all happen one after another, and there can't be any pausing. You can't like pour the plate and then go have a sandwich and come back and finish the plate. And I have to develop the plate before the plate dries, and I have to fix the plate before it dries. So I have to have a dark room with me, and I have to have ample amount of water to process this. So it's not like you go then dry plate. And just to explain, in 1885 they replaced wet plating with dry plating because you could buy the plates directly from Kodak Eastman with the emulsion on them. You just keep them in the dark sleeves, you load them in a little black box, and you could take a plate, you take another picture, you take another picture, you take another picture, you got 20 pictures. Orlando Scott Goff talked about taking 86 dry plates in a day. He called it the lightning process. I read the newspaper article. And then you could come back weeks and weeks later and develop and fix and rinse in that. So it freed the dry plate in 1885 was the real reason why they abandoned wet plating, because it freed the photographer up from his darkroom. I could go now on my horse and buggy to the Badlands and take photographs hundreds of miles away and come back 4 days later and then do all my development.
And then before you know it, we had digital cameras, you know.
Then Mike, then we had digital cameras 2 days later.
Yeah, awesome.
That's awesome.
Very, very nice.
Did I answer your question? I tend to go around in circles a little bit, but yeah, so it's a very arduous process, and I taught myself. I'm completely self-taught, and the only way that I knew how to learn, sir, I'm a registered nurse, so I knew how to handle chemistry and do measurements with liquids and stuff like that, titration and stuff like that, because I gave chemotherapy. So it prepared me a little bit for that. So I had a little bit of expertise with handling of these kind of liquids. Let me ask you guys, what kind of fixer did they use in Orlando Scott Goff's day?
I have no idea.
Potassium cyanide.
Very good. Who said that?
Jim.
Damn it, Jim. From now on, I'm going to ask everyone but Jim. Everyone but Jim, I'm going to ask you a question. Yes.
I was going to ask you if you're using it, but
yeah, that's a good question. And the answer is, so I was reading how to teach myself this, right? And I got to the damn page in the book that said potassium cyanide in liquid form. Well, I'm a nurse. I'm no idiot, right? Like potassium cyanide, a couple of drops in any of your mucosa in your mouth or in your eyes, you're dead in about 14 seconds.
yeah,
So
it's killer.
I've read articles where a cup back in the Victorian era got from the darkroom into the family's room and killed the entire family. So can you imagine? So I promised my wife that night, I said, well, shit, I'm not going to have a liter of potassium cyanide in liquid form, and have 40 students in the darkroom, and I drop that and we all drop over dead or something. So
well, there's an earthquake.
I use hypo, which is rapid fixer, which is what they would have used in the 1950s and stuff for regular film. So it's the one place that I deviate from this process, is that I do not use, but I went
to be alive.
Yeah, well, here's the story, is like my first experience with potassium cyanide. Guess what it was, Jim? I'm over in the United Kingdom at a friend's studio, Tony Richards, and we're making plates and we were drinking and all this stuff. We're making plates, and he yells, and I'm fixing this plate. Guess what he does? He yells from the other room, by the way, that's potassium cyanide that you're using.
Oh boy.
Was he kidding or was he serious?
No, he was serious. Dead
Oh,
serious.
shit.
Dead serious. Yeah.
Yeah, no, you'd not be drinking when you're playing with that kind of stuff.
You shouldn't have drinks in the dark room when potassium cyanide is
I learned
anywhere.
that one early on.
Within 100 yards, you should have a beverage open.
Yeah. Yeah, you celebrate after you're done.
Yeah. But yeah.
What about varnish? Are you mixing your own varnish?
I buy shellac from a UV Photographics is where I get my varnish from. So they make a quadruple filtered shellac. It's like an ultra pure shellac. I was making plates when I was using other kinds of, they use Sanderac varnish quite a bit, Jim. So back in the day, okay. And they use different forms of shellac and stuff like that. And today people can cheat. They can just grab like lacquer, spray lacquer, a modern day, 3M spray lacquer, and they can do that. But, I try to say as close as I can to, and this recipe for the varnish that I use is from the Victorian era that he uses. But it was, if you use the Sanderac, it's really amber looking. So it actually, it like you have to overexpose your image.
Yeah, it'll darken your plate.
Or it'll darken your plate. So you find yourself, until I found this, I was finding myself overexposing and losing some of the tonality, Jim, of my work, trying to get them to brighten up after I shellac them. And that's just not the way to do it. But again, I was explaining to the team here, I was learning by trial and error. So all I can do is, I'll try this product. No, God, I hate that. And but this product, I would buy it from UV Photographics. And then the other question, Jim, for you is that answer for you is that I buy all my stuff from Bostic and Sullivan. They're a proprietor of wet plate collodion chemistry. And why I do that is because I'm so prevalent in how many plates that I make. I probably make more plates than most anyone else in the world.
Dick and Dana love you.
Yeah, Dana. Yeah. So I buy all my stuff from Dana, and it gives me, what it gives me, Jim, is it gives me consistency. You know what I mean? I'm not sourcing all and I've got the recipes to do this shit, and there's no reason I can't figure out to do this, but I'm never been impressed with people that worry about that kind of stuff. It's always the end result for me. It's always about the plate. Nobody really cares. And there was proprietors of wet plate chemistry back in the Victorian era as well. You just get everything. You get your camera, you get your lens, you get your chemistry, and you could just get the whole box set from these people. So this isn't something new. I mean, photographers have been finding their favorite proprietors of chemistry, all throughout the entire history of photography.
And they discontinue it.
And then they can discontinue it. But the beauty about this wet plate is I do have those recipes, and nobody's going to discontinue my film, because guess what? I'm making my own damn film.
I may end up having to go to wet plate at some point if I live long enough, because I'll run out of film.
Well, Jim, when you're ready to go to wet plate, you come grab Mike by the scruff of the neck, and you guys both come in. And if you come in on a Thursday and you leave on a Sunday, if you give me those days, you will know how to make a wet plate before you leave. I promise you that.
Well, I've made a couple, but they're ugly.
No, well,
Hey, Jim, that sounds like a good idea. Let's do it.
I can help you. I can help you. I'm not kidding, Mike. I'm not kidding. I do not make offers.
There's just an art
willy-nilly.
into pouring plates and spreading the collodion. It's just that
by the end of the day, by the end of the weekend, I have had Herb Asherman, 60-year photographer, come in from Cleveland, Ohio. He was like the preeminent platinum plater photographer to photograph like 6 presidents and stuff like that. He came in, spent the weekend with me. He left on Sunday, and the following week he was independently making plates on his own with my assistance remotely. So it's not, people always think that you got to pay $5,000 to go to some of these different venues and learn. I try to tell people all the time, this isn't magic. You have to just be very dedicated to it. You have to be astute to rules. Try not to change any rules, and listen to instruction. And it's not magic. It's not magic. It takes some practice. It's taken me 11 years to get to the quality of the work there. I keep my old prints and my old scans and stuff, and I got everything since day one. They're all numbered, and it's amazing to go back and look at my previous work to where I find myself now. It was big jumps and leaps when I first started, but then it became, Jim, you know what it's like. It's that baby step. Like, it's a lot of work to get that next little step. And to answer Mike's question earlier, he said something about me perfecting or mastering this process. I haven't done that yet, and I don't plan on doing that.
Always learning.
But you're close.
There was this world famous, I think he was a flute player, or he was a saxophone player. He was 96 years old, and he was practicing, and they went up to him. I saw this video, and he was world famous. They went up to him and said, "Why are you practicing? You're 96." He says, "Well, I can still get better."
Yeah.
So that's how I approach this. And I don't consider myself a master by any means. And I'll just continue to improve. And what's most important is to share this process with the world. And if photographers want to come in and learn this process, I'm an open book. There's no, I don't keep trade secrets. There's no, I'll show you exactly what I'm doing here. And if you follow me on social media and stuff like that, you'll see that I show behind the scenes photographs of how I make things. People have chastised me, well, don't show them all your tricks, Shane. And I'm like, you know what I mean? Like, it's cool to show my tricks. Like I've got that one wet plate of where Alan Demery, the Hidatsa Native American's holding onto the bust of a buffalo. So there's a buffalo in profile, and Alan, it's called Brothers. And Alan's went up and grabbed this buffalo by the chin and is looking at him adoringly. And I posted the plate out there knowing that, you know, doing this, and people were just like, how in the hell did you get that buffalo to hold still? And then an hour later, I shared the photograph. MHA Nation took their buffalo bust, they're the most prized possession, off their wall, their taxidermy, and put it in the back of Alan's truck. He drove it all the way down here. I put it on a ladder. And so if you look at me shooting that plate, you see a ladder with this half buffalo on this dead buffalo, and you see Alan on his knees holding this buffalo. But everyone thought to this day, and it's a meme. I mean, it's been shared hundreds of thousands of times. This meme called Brothers, where this Native American is in tune with this buffalo, but what people don't understand is that buffalo was on a ladder, and that was a taxidermy buffalo. But going back to what I said to you earlier, Mike, it's all about the image. It's not about how you get there.
Yeah. Anybody else have anything?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
Hey Shane, it's George.
Hey,
So,
George.
talked really well about the technical side of I can't say how much I admire all of your work that I see here. I'd love to see
Thank you.
more of it. But when you have somebody, one of the native Indians, come into your studio, you've got several different poses here. What's your process to select the pose for the individual that comes in versus the next person?
Yeah, and that is a challenge. And what I do, George, is I just present, because a lot of these portraits, I get more than one opportunity. So maybe I'll, some Native Americans only get one opportunity. Like some afternoons, I'll have like 18 people in the studio. I mean, I'm making 18 plates in a day. I mean, that's 10 hours of just making plates. But if I have, like, if someone comes in and I've got an opportunity to do 2 of them, I just essentially present them with a chair, George, and say, have a seat, and let them find find their comfort zone. And then I always do like if I got the opportunity to do more than one plate, I do just like a really simple pose, like a headshot a lot of times, just to kind of get them used to this long exposure. And then I just kind of talk to them and ask them, what do you think it is, or anything. A lot of times, George, they'll bring in a photograph of Edward Curtis that was their great grandfather, and they'll say, I just love this photograph of my grandfather that Edward Curtis took. Or I mean, it doesn't even have to be a famous photographer, didn't have to take it. Or I've got this photograph from 1890 of my grandfather or something like that, and I really like that. And then we just use that for inspiration. But it's always a collaboration. You'll never see me. And then I take my sitters into my darkroom with me. So this isn't, oh, sit down in the chair, I'll be back and I'll show you your plate later. They immediately jump up from the chair. They follow me, George, into the dark room. We're developing the plate next to them. They're watching me fix the plate. They're watching me rinse the plate, and we have conversations and stuff. So if you have that opportunity, we've had all that time together. I'm building a rapport with this person, George, as we're doing this. And I think it's that rapport that maybe shows itself a little bit to you in some of the work. But there's never, so we're inspired by other photographs. I've got the entire, Edward Curtis had 24 volumes. I'm not sure if you guys are aware of that. Edward Curtis is the most famous Native American portrait photographer in the history of mankind. He took 40,000 dry plates of Native Americans from 1901 to like 1928 or something like that. And I have all 24 volumes of his book series on the wall, just within a couple feet of me. It's called the North American Indian. And if it was an original set, it's a reproduction. I paid $8,000 for this reproduction set of 24 volumes of his books. If it was an original set, the last original set of Edward Curtis's books, like I have an exact replica of, sold for $3.8 million if it was a complete set.
Yeah, they have one of the sets at the University of Fort.
Full set?
Full set, yeah.
Have you seen it?
No, nobody can see it.
Well, you should know. They should make it available.
I just read that they do have that.
You have to go ask to see it.
Yeah.
Seriously, just I'm almost sure I mean, that's why it's there. I mean, if you want an experience, you guys should just ask and say, hey, can we come in on this day? And you don't have to see the whole thing. Just find the book that has the Native Americans from Oregon, right? There's tribes there. And just ask to see one book. I'm telling you, people, you guys have like this national treasure there that sets worth $3.8 million. And to be able to, I mean, it's something from I have a Native American elders come into my studio. I put white gloves on them, set them down at a table and lay the books out. And they read about 2 years ago, Calvin Grinnell, the gentleman who gave me my Hadat's name, he said, there's a tradition, there's an oral history, Shane, about these 3 skulls. We know that Edward Curtis came to the Hidatsa Nation and photographed, we believe, these skulls. Can I look through your books? We don't know if it's 3 or 4 skulls. So the oral history was not complete for his tribe. And as an elder and as a historian, he said, can we look through your book? Calvin came in for an afternoon, and sure enough, he found the page that Edward Curtis talked about the 4 skulls. And at that moment, he could go back and say, if Edward Curtis was talking about 4 skulls in the early 1900s, that's the best information that we have. There's no reason Edward Curtis would have lied about the number of skulls. So in these very important skulls, the ceremonial skulls, we had a modern day elder questioning oral history, and we had the elder coming into my studio looking at these not original documents, a fabrication or a facsimile of his original set of books, and finding the answer that he was looking for. I mean, what more can you ask for? I mean, that entire $8,000 set of books that I bought was paid off that moment when he found that for me.
Yeah.
Well
That-
done.
Great.
Yeah.
Wow.
And inspiring too, Shane.
Oh,
Very
yeah.
inspiring.
If you guys can take a look at you guys, they're gonna have, it's gonna have his original like albumin prints in that book, you guys.
We'll have to see what we can do. We might make this a
I
project.
mean, that would be quite the little trip if you guys could have. I'm sure they'd make it available to you to be able to see that.
We'll keep you informed. I think.
Yeah, yeah.
Sure.
Thanks for sharing that with me, George.
Yeah, originally that set, JP Morgan actually funded.
Yep. Well, yeah, he funded it. Yep. He gave him $50,000. Have you ever read the book, The Night of the Shadow Catcher?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's
One of my
I've read it.
favorite books.
I've read it 4 times. So it's a fascinating story, but and he was doing dry plates, and just to think about what it's taken me to do, what it's going to take me to do 1,000 wet plates. You know what I mean? Can you imagine 40,000 dry plates? And there's that story in the book where his ex-wife was pissed off and she went across the street and started smashing his negatives.
Oh.
Yeah.
There's the story where he had that apprentice that was with him on the mule, and the glass plates they were going through the Rockies or whatever, and the plates were so heavy. These glass plates get very, very heavy, and he on purposely broke them so they didn't have to carry them any further.
Wow.
Wow. Well, this all kind of falls into where my last thoughts are, again, on your work. Remarkably beautiful, technically proficient, but to talk about this particular series, because you do other work, I know.
Yes.
And this is the series, that I wanted to show, obviously, and I find that this is a very important body of work you're doing, probably equally as important as what Curtis did, I imagine, once you're all said and done,
Well, I
these
can try
people
my best.
are the ancestors of a very important culture, and you can see and feel the power of everything in these photographs. So I wish they were the original plates. That would be incredible. I'd love to visit you just to see more original plates.
Yeah. But you have one of them, so that's better
I
than nothing.
do.
And we should let everyone know that it was just happenstance that I was getting 40 of these prints together for a larger exhibition
Right.
at an opera house, and he just called me, and those had just arrived that day. And I'm like, I don't have that exhibition till September. If you want 20 of them, Mike, you can have them. I'll send them to you, and you guys can have them in the interim. And so this was all, we just threw this together in an afternoon, you guys.
And we both, Shane and I both, we get into the fact that connection can be made, and that kind of was there in front of us. It was like perfect timing, and it worked out for
It
both.
couldn't have been bad. If you would have called me 2 months later or called me 2 months previously, I wouldn't have been able to, package these up, frame them and get them to you. So.
I've been an honor to have your work here at LightBox and
Oh, it's a pleasure.
the whole experience. I'm so happy that we could have this talk tonight and our technical difficulties disappeared.
It was
and,
nice.
It would
It's meant to be, Mike, meant to be, Mike.
Yeah, it
Meant
would
to
have
be.
been a tragedy not to have had this experience of the talk tonight. It was really great. As I said, I think we could talk for another hour, and I'm okay if that's what you guys want to do. But to be realistic, we all have to get going and stuff.
Yeah, I understand. And you guys noticed that I asked Mike, are you recording this? I'm not interested in hearing myself talk. Okay, I bore the hell out of myself and I hate my own voice. But the reason why I asked Mike, are you recording this? Because Mike's going to give me a copy of this Zoom meeting. It's because when you're a historian and you're trying to document things, this Zoom meeting will be saved on my hard drive and it will go up to the State Historical Society of North Dakota. So who knows, 150 years from now, someone may look at this video and see this conversation that we've had. And that's what it's all about for me, is like leaving these little remnants of what I'm trying to do here with the plate. So the Historical Society said, can we have the digital content as well, Shane? Can you show us the behind the scenes? Can you share with us all this other stuff, these interviews and magazines and all these things, that books and everything that you're doing? And that's what I'm doing. So it's really fun to be able to have you all here with me and to think, romantically, that maybe 150 years from now, some little archive, it doesn't have to be some big movie theater, right? But some little archivist stumbles upon this little file and clicks on this Zoom meeting, from the Lightbox gallery, and clicks on it, and all of a sudden, all of us, guess what happens that moment, you guys? We're all alive again.
Yeah.
And who can have that opportunity? Who can have that opportunity than to be able to do this kind of stuff? And that's what I live for, and that's why I do this.
Well, tell you the truth, man, I'd like to do this again with you someday. It's been really nice.
Whenever you want, Mike, and I'm here for you. And please take me up on that offer. I would cherish the ability to take your portrait for your family. The plate will be, I'll gift the plate to you and your family, and just come and see me.
That's great. Well, you know what? I can't turn that
Jim,
off.
you come with them, Jim.
I'm going to be talking
I'm
to
up
Jim.
for a
He's
road
got the
trip,
fast car.
You guys
All
come
right,
see me.
yeah. Well, we're going to call it a night then. Okay?
Yes, I appreciate you guys. Thank you. I hope I didn't get too long-winded, but I
Not
have
at
these
all.
opportunity. I try to share, and this is my journey. And thanks for appreciating the work that I have. It means a lot to me.
Absolutely. And
Keep it up, brother.
I'm gonna duck my head in and say a special hello to Shane. Shane, hi, it's Jody Miller.
Hi, Jody. I didn't even recognize you. Hi, you're in the front row too.
Front
Jody
row.
and I friended each other. How long's it been, Jody?
Oh, it's been a long time, 6 or 7 years.
Victory Tischler.
Yes.
Blue is.
Victory sends her love, by the way.
Oh, wonderful. So you were, yeah. So I'm sorry, I didn't realize it was you in the front row. So
Well, no,
thank
Why
you for
would
so
you?
much.
it's good to see you.
this
Nice
is
to
Jody-
meet you, ma'am. Thanks for making it.
This is Jody's home around here. Yeah.
Okay.
Well,
Thanks, Jody. Does my heart good to see your face.
yeah, we'll talk more. I think I'm going to talk to Jim. I'm going to see if Jim wants to join me. We're going to head out to North Dakota sometime.
Okay, sounds good. We'll
And,
do it.
All right. Good night, Shane. Thank you,
Okay.
sir. It's been an honor. And next time.
Thanks for sharing my work.
You're welcome.
Later, Shane.
Okay,
Good to
bye.
see ya.
See you later, Jim.
All
Good night,
right.
everybody.
Take care, buddy.
Thank you, everyone, for
Yep.
joining us.
Thanks, Mike.
We're going to shut her down. Hey, there he is. Now Jim's on there. Hey, Jim.
Good.
Can you see us, Jim?
What you want?
Oh, nothing. I want nothing.
Yeah.
When are we going to North Dakota?
Yes, I don't know. When you got time?
I guess.
Yeah,
All right, we're
You
gonna
gotta
shut
do
it
it, you
down.
gotta
Jim.
do it when the weather's good.
yeah.
Julie, it was nice to have you here, and everyone else that joined us, thank you very much. We're gonna shut it down. We'll see you later.
Hasta
Thank
la
you.
vista, baby.